possibly once in a career where you get to go through your ordinances like this, as you as a board as well, you're with us on this one. And I'd say that we have some big ideas. We also have some things that just need to be clarified or cleaned up. There was very old language in there. Lots of staff research went into this, lots of hours, lots of Ann's hours. I want to thank Ann from legal. She's done a great job helping direct us in these conversations. I do have one piece of paper today that we put on the desk that's already been a change. We had one early comment. I'm sure there'll be others, but Board Member Nassif sent us a question on section 7492. So when we get to that, that's the consumption of alcohol. Please use this revised one, and we'll get to that point. We'll talk about that when we get there. And disregard the one in your packet because we found a good idea that needed to be, I guess, less convoluted and less complicated to understand. So we realign the language to be less complicated.
We have a copy of that.
Everybody should have a copy at their desk with blue strikeout changes. If you don't, I've got one for you right here, George. I didn't have mine. I'll share with you. And then I've asked Richard, this presentation is more for the folks on the camera and watching on YouTube, all those great things. It's not meant to be the full overview strikeout changes. That's where we're going to rely on you to ask questions. This is just meant to give you some of the high-level, bigger changes. So without further ado, I'll let Richard go through that, and then we can start our discussion. That's okay with the board.
Great. Chair Davis, members of the Parks and Recreation Board, Richard Brown, Assistant Director. Like Ben said, we just want to try to give you the high overview of why we're doing this, since most of the board is new since we've done a major update to Chapter 74, what we want to kind of accomplish with these updates, and then we're going to go over a few of the major highlights of what you've seen here. Obviously, with an 8-page communication, I'm not going to cover everything, but when I cover the big ones we think might have the most discussion, and then we'll be happy to take questions after I'm done. So the first one, Chapter 74, this is the chapter of the City Code that really outlines the role of the Parks and Recreation Board, as well as helps to define how city parks and facilities should be operated, as well as setting fees for the use of our facilities and the programming that our department provides to the community. One of the things we wanted to do when we took a wholesale look at this was we wanted to make sure that it was consistent with our recently adopted LibDSM plan that was adopted by the City Council in mid-December of 2018. So this really represents one of the first major things that we are undertaking upon adoption of that plan. So we want to make sure that it really meets and pushes the city towards meeting the goals of that. We want to look at the major items, and really we wanted to review them against the equity goals that we want to be able to deliver equitable facilities and services to the residents of Des Moines, and really understand some of the impacts that changes to this ordinance might make to the people that live in the city of Des Moines, or perhaps use our facilities or participate in some of our programs. And we just want to make sure that we move towards that end of providing those equitable services and facilities. Along the way also too, we want to make sure that this really doesn't prohibit us from attacking the 4 other goals of creating programs that attract people to our parks and our facilities, making sure that parks and trails are the heart of our community, providing innovative services to the citizens of Des Moines, be through our services in the Park and Recreation Department, and improving nature, although equity is really the one that relates most to this ordinance itself. Like Ben said, there's a lot of changes, some major, some minor, but really wanted to just kind of walk you through a few of these major ones. That will include park hours, the use of tobacco in our parks and our facilities, fees for use of facilities and programs. We want to make sure we clarify some of the intent of what we're talking about through the ordinance, remove unnecessary items, and talk about alcohol use at some of our facilities. So currently, park hours. Currently our hours are 6 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset each day. So well, $100 for whoever can tell me what time sunset is today without looking at your phones. No, so you can see that's something that's very difficult for our police department to enforce and for us to enforce as an organization. So it just really creates difficulties in trying to figure out when people should or shouldn't be in the park system, when programs should end, or when people need to be out of there. So what we did is we took that guidance from LibDSM and we actually reached out to all the parks and recreation agencies in the metro area, the biggest cities in Iowa, as well as the agencies that we aspire to be, as well as what we considered peer agencies in LibDSM. And we just did some survey work and said, When are your parks open? When do they close? Do you have exceptions? Do you worry about people being in your park system after dark without lights? Asked a whole series of questions that really we felt would be important to understanding and bringing a recommendation forward. After seeing that, we found that we probably had one of the most restrictive set of park operation hours out of anyone we registered and surveyed. The only other one that was similar to us was Carlisle, just south of us, but no one else had anything like that. Most hours open anywhere from 5 to 6 a.m. in the morning and closed anywhere from 10 p.m. to almost 1 a.m., depending on the park system, the facility. So what we're doing is recommending to you that the hours of the Parks and Recreation system should be 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. daily with exceptions. Here's just a highlight of some of the exceptions, but also make sure you read the ordinance proposed draft language there on facilities. But really, it goes trails, which are open 24/7 because of the part of the city's transportation system. And a lot of these other facilities here either have programming need to be open later because of events and activities that are out there, to the way people use them. Some of them, like Rays Lake, have lights that allow people to be out there for a longer period of time, or we have a concessionaire's agreement that allows people to be in these spaces. So recommend 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., which is a change on the end when they would close each night. We feel like it would give more consistency to the police department and staff to enforce those hours, and also at the same time really would increase the ability for people to be in the park system long after they would have to be out currently. I know one thing that was brought up by Chair Davis here a little while ago before the meeting started was talking about sports facilities. Right now, we don't have a special provision for them that should be open later than 10 p.m., but he pointed out that we do often have events there that go anywhere from 11 to midnight, so potentially a recommended change might be to allow sports complexes to stay up until midnight, depending on the direction we get from the board.
A quick question. Is there a provision for either through the board or through the director to deviate from these hours if there's an event or something comes up?
There's a provision you'll see later on throughout the bylaws that allows me to do temporary, and Ann and I have decided, because temporary can be a lot to different people here, we can all have a different definition of temporary. So temporary is about one season, one park season, so I can make temporary adjustments, and if those hours need to remain, I need to come back to the board to ask for your thoughts and approval, and then again, changing ordinance language. I think it's good. We should stop right here because this is one of the two bigger changes we're proposing here, and answer questions. And again, let's get it right tonight so we're back in a month from now with what I consider to be the final adoption for you all. So I'm open now. We'll open the comments, I guess, if you're okay with that.
What page number are, Richard, as you go down this, can you reference the page number that we can?
In the actual draft ordinance that you have?
In the draft.
Yeah, so it would be 74-101, which starts at the bottom of page 8.
Okay.
And continues into page 9.
George has already brought up to us today that I
I wanna-
believe the midnight, and I support that from my spot. You can see that we have multiple facilities that are open till at least midnight, and we're operating that way today, so it should just be something we recognize and formalize through our code adoption.
I want to also make more information on that. Usually a lot of our adult athletic events used to start at 6 o'clock, and they've moved those back mostly to 6:30 because of transportation problems getting from one area to another. And so to give you an example, I know because of the umpiring that for example, Thursday night or Friday night or whatever, games are 6:30, 7:30, 8:30, 9:30, and a lot of them run over. So sometimes it's 11 or 11:15 before you get done at the sports complex. So I thought 12 o'clock that Ben suggested, that might be a good time. And then also we can have exceptions if there's an out-of-town tournament that comes in, for example, a regional tournament that has a rain delay and stuff. Sometimes they play till 1 in the morning. So I just wanted everyone to be aware of that. It's not a blanket thing, but Matt, as you know, with the time elements involved in adult athletics, sometimes they run very late.
So why is asked that question? And under this ordinance change, how do you deal with those situations?
So if we go to midnight, for example, and it went to 1 o'clock, is that what you're asking? Like,
Well, I mean, this says tenant, would these changes cause a problem for those events that run over past 10
what we need to do is have an exception underneath that slide there, and you'd see it on page 9. We'd add it to this area and say, and list which sports complexes, adult softball out in the northeast side of town, county soccer, etc., and say midnight. midnight will cover 99% of what we need. Outside of that, I'll have that rule that allows me to approve exceptions for, occasional issues like that. And Dave, I want to point out to you, we're already doing this, and I can tell you, I've been here now 12 years now, starting my 12th year. I have 0 complaints on our sports complex hours, and they are operating past 11:30, 12 o'clock, so.
Now, the one sports complex that has been omitted is Savage, and that's a sports complex.
Yep.
Also.
So that's just an error that will get put in there.
So you're saying that our sports complexes are county soccer, county baseball, Greater Des Moines softball, and Savage softball. The 4 complexes, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So Joel, that means that if you're out in the backyard playing something, you're not covered.
Well, I can stay out in my backyard as long as I want.
Perfect. How about the general hours? I like the general hours research that we've come up with. I like the fact we're using our aspirational cities and benchmark cities. I think 10 o'clock's a good middle ground to start off with. It can be amended at any point, but I think it's a good starting spot.
I like it a lot. I know you did research on our contiguous communities, but I know a lot of them, 10 o'clock seems to be a more consistent time, so it's nice to see consistency.
I agree. I like the 10 o'clock time.
We also ran the hours by our police chief and our police department, and they were all supportive.
Sunrise, sunset was kind of ambiguous.
Yeah, it'll add a lot of hours on the winter time, and it'll add a little bit of hours during the summertime. And it's respectful of, I think, neighborhoods that have neighborhood parks. Okay, next slide then.
All right, the next one is tobacco use in parks. What we're proposing is no smoking or tobacco use at any park or park facility. Generally summarized, current regulations prevent smoking inside of facilities, at youth events, and within 25 feet of most facilities. So really taking that and taking it to the next step where all smoking and tobacco use would be prohibited within the park, city park system.
Page 15 for those looking at the
74116. So you can see on page 15 is all the current text, and then the new text starts towards the bottom of that page.
We felt as staff, we've had different times throughout my time on this board with you as your director, that we've had people in this audience right here in this room that have come to ask you to do this. And at different times we've decided not to take it, but we felt that if there was ever a time to really think about this, it's now, as we overdo the entire ordinance and we don't just spot change. Hopefully you all walked by the big cube of cigarette butts as you walked in the door. It wouldn't fit to the door here, otherwise it would be here tonight. It's bigger than our doorways, unfortunately. However, that could be done about every big park every week. We could fill that up in one park per week. And so we asked ourselves, where does this fit in our mission of helping Des Moines live well, play hard, and protect the earth? It doesn't fit anywhere in our mission. And so we are bringing it to you to say, again, for the ease of governing park rules, the 25-foot rule the state has is great, is a good starting point for most cities, but it's not very easily to enforce. You heard Mr. Quinn not too long ago come to us and talk about some of the issues he's experienced just in McHenry Park, an average size park in our system. So we believe it's easier for us to educate. Enforcement's a whole different topic, but to educate the public, it's easier to say we are tobacco-free at all of our parks.
I also like to note that we are including vaping as part of that as a prohibited item as well. Just wanted you to be clear.
Does that include musical events like Simon Estes, Benton,
All of our
Gateway West?
property, our golf courses are included in that as well.
Yep.
I'd
Anything
like
under
to talk about the golf courses.
Yeah.
Is there any way to, some people like to smoke cigars and play golf. Is there any way to not restrict the rights of a person that likes to smoke a cigar and play golf?
We talked about that because we knew there would be a handful of items that folks would want to talk about. For city government, it's much more consistent for us to have a rule for all the property managers versus to spot zone because, again, I looked at it like this. We are tying this back to our mission. What's our mission in providing parks and recreational facilities? Healthy living. So we're not offended if there's a majority that wants to spot select where parks and what facilities, but my recommendation is all the park system and all the park spaces we manage today. Now, I'll tell you right now, we talked again with the police department. Is that something that's going to be easily enforced? Not really. And will it be a high priority? Probably not. So it'll be more self-policed, and I don't see us having you kicked off the golf course, for example, if you're on the 13th hole and you're smoking unless somebody really is bothered by it. That's where we came down. I mean, I just tell you how we came up with the idea. So.
Okay.
I guess when I read through it, a little surprised to see that snuff and chewing products, tobacco chewing products, are also banned, and it doesn't so much affect the health of others. I mean, it's disgusting, you know, and it can affect the user's health, but they're included too in the ban. So, what's the thought on that? Just
Again, it came down to the health issue, as well as when we did our research with other cities, that it was because of there's so many different tobacco use type of products, it was easier to govern because what's the next thing coming down? I mean, just a few years ago, there was no vaping out there. Now there's vaping. So we're trying to stay ahead of just everything that's going to be coming down the pipe.
well, I'm fine with it.
What'd you say, Bill?
I said I'm fine with it. I just, you know, it doesn't affect the health of others as opposed to the person using it. But, you know,
I'd like to have, you know, everyone's involvement, because ultimately this has to go to the, you know, to the city council and stuff, and this is a huge statement, and we talked about it at the executive meeting at length, and I don't want us to be so, I think it's more about the statement that we're making than it is the enforcement. If someone's smoking and you call the police, you might be waiting till November for that call to get answered. But all in all, it's a positive statement. I think most of us, even smokers, we had a couple of smokers that even agreed with it. It's a positive statement. It's like a speed limit. Speed limit's 35. You know, some people look at that as a suggestion, but it actually it's a rule. So, and I think it's the same thing here. Who is opposed to this? As far as, you know, you're worried about the language, and we're certainly not going to be critical of you. But who thinks that this? Mr. Ballard, any comments? Go ahead.
I think it's a big challenge because he points out some people like to. I'm not a smoker, so I don't really care. But
And neither am I, by the way, for the record.
But if somebody, as opposed to somebody else smoking, they report it to the clubhouse. And then effectively what we said is nothing's going to happen because the kid who's working for the summer in the clubhouse is not going to go out to the guy on the course smoking. And if they call the police are not going to come before the guy has quit smoking. So it seems like there's not a lot of teeth in making this statement. And so it seems kind of foolish to make the statement if you can't really enforce it.
I think one thing that it does allow is if this is enforced and I'm behind the person in the cart smoking the cigar, I at least can go say to that person, hey, did you know that that smoking is prohibited? And yeah, I'm not going to give you a ticket or call the police on you, but you know, it maybe puts a little bit of teeth behind somebody who wants to enjoy the park smoke-free and can say that. You know, then it's up to that individual to put their cigarette out or to blow it in your face.
One of the things it'll do for us, I want to test your memory here. 2 trash bashes ago, if you were on the board, we went down to Prospect Park.
Yeah.
And if we just only picked up cigarette butts that day, we'd probably still be there. And that's not an exaggeration. So it gives us a tool where we have a lot of issues for enforcement. But city government, it's a one-size-all approach to a lot of the rules we have to have. Again, it goes back to consistency. So when we have a spot like a Prospect Park, or we'll use McHenry when we talked about Mr. Quinn being here, we can say the police can help us in enforcing some of the litter issues that fall into our storm sewers and our environment, all those type of things. They can say, hey, you can't smoke here. And I'll tell you, there are people that just go to Prospect Park just to smoke, and they leave it there and they're done. So that's one tool that I really would like to have as the director, is the ability to limit that. And now, again, it's only as good as the enforcement issues that we can get with the priority of the police department.
It would this result in a fine if someone were found smoking, or what's the penalty?
Take the cigarettes.
Taking their
No, ask
cigarettes.
again. What do we do again?
I actually don't know if there's been any enforcement, because that would be through the police department, and that's just not something that gets reported to me on. It would be a fine. I mean, it is technically a simple misdemeanor, which does have potential for, I think, up to 30 days imprisonment, but that is something that would just not be requested by the city, and that would be extremely rare, kind of unheard of, that for a simple misdemeanor that a judge would impose a sentence as opposed to a fine.
If the person's huge, you might just drive past them, but
What are the rules currently for smoking on a golf course?
And I want to be clear, I was only talking
Yeah,
about the golf
great.
course.
So the strikeout language here is the state's law, the 25-foot from facilities and basically infrastructure, if you think of it like that. At a golf course, the clubhouse, 25 feet from the actual clubhouse. Now, I did speak with the golf course operators, and although that they're not registering against it, they understood what we were trying to do. They think the same thing. It could be problematic, but they're willing to try it. But I want to remind you here today is anything we try can be repealed through the same, it's a long process. We come back here, we talk about it, you make a proposal, we take it back to city council.
How has this worked in other cities?
West Des Moines is the best example, and I've personally spoken with their director. They have a great website. They've found it to be the first year a lot of education, and they have an FAQ section of their website that talks about how they look at this versus education, again versus enforcement. They've had, it was a great news article probably right away, and then it kind of went away, and things got better, but not substantially better. So.
some of it's just general mores too. I mean, how many times have you been in a bleacher and or in a bleachers at a sports event, and really you don't have many people just light up anymore like they used to. I mean, it's kind of fading into the old school arena. I talked with umpires about this also, that a lot of times our umpires at sporting events are the ones that enforce stuff, at ball fields and stuff like that, and they didn't have a problem with it, and a lot of them are smokers, but they said it's actually, most of the smokers said it's a pretty good rule, Now, will they violate it? Probably, but at least they said it's making a statement.
I know, like a lot of our live music events, I mean, I'd agree that the culture's kind of changed on it. And Simon Estes written in like 8035 is prohibited from smoking on the on the grounds in Gateway West. But at all those places, people have the options to leave and go out front on the public sidewalk and smoke and go back in, and that seems to be kind of an accepted way to deal with it. So I don't really have any problems with it. Again, like anything else, I don't know if there'd ever be an event where this would be an issue. But again, I suppose the same thing. If there was some exception, someone could come before the board or for you and ask for a waiver for a particular event under this change.
Probably not.
Probably not for this section, not the way it's written now, no.
Does this include parking
But
lots?
I think you have a good comment, is that the fact is that today, a lot of our parks are, I'll use the neighborhood parks. Today, if this was approved, if you wanted to smoke, you could walk across the street and you're technically within right of way. It's not parkland. If you wanted to smoke across the street, you could. The city owns the right of way in front of, say it's my house, for example, across the street from the park. Not that I'm encouraging people to go do that, but that would be what their option is, to walk across the street out of the park and go smoke.
What about, if a person's inside their personal car in a parking lot inside a park? And I didn't want to throw a tough
Are the
one.
windows up, the windows down? I'm probably thinking it's gonna be the same thing. You're still in the boundaries of the park
Yeah.
smoking.
That would be my initial response to that. That might have a mitigating factor, though, if a police officer did arrive, and they might say, well, you're not offending anyone with this, but technically, yes, you can't. I mean, it'd be the same thing. You couldn't set up a little tent and go inside and smoke and say, well, I'm not really in the park. It's really the same thing.
It's what's underneath the ground there. We are.
Let's kick it around,
Yeah,
folks,
we're
because
generally open to your thoughts. We want to make sure. we
Stephen,
get
what
this
do
right.
you, comments?
Supportive of it.
Beg your pardon?
I'm supportive of it.
Okay.
I'm too. I
I
agree.
support it.
Yeah.
I support it. I just think the biggest challenge will be the golf course.
Oh, I think it'd be athletic events, adult.
Oh, no, live
There's a lot
music
more
events.
peer pressure there. At an event like that, there's a lot more people who would be right there who may be opposed to smoking, who might be willing to step up. At a golf course, you're going to be me and you. And I tell you, you can't smoke, and you say, who the hell are you?
Yeah. I think it's something that you're always going to have people that are going to go against it the first year, but I think as time goes on, actually, I thought health reasons took care of a lot of those people as time went on. But maybe not. I think it's probably good. I mean, the enforcement is going to be tough, but, you know, it's like park hours. I think that if you have something there and a policeman is called, you know, and rather than have the person say, well, we're not moving and we're not doing anything wrong. You now have hours that they could be in violation. You now have smoking that they could be in violation. I think we're giving enforcement another avenue to use to disband situations. I mean, is
No
that
smoking on the golf course after 10 o'clock.
Here's the good news, you have 30 more days to think about this.
Yeah.
Because this is a receiving file.
Okay.
But I just need enough head signals to tell us we're on the right path.
Yes.
Reluctantly.
by show of hands? Everyone supports this at the first reading?
Yep.
Okay, all right.
Thank you. It's gonna get easier for the rest of the night now, I promise you.
So the next section, we're not going to go over everything here, but in the blue letter itself, there's about 3 pages of proposed changes to the fee section of the ordinance. Here's just a quick sampling of them. One is community recreation center room rentals. What we're trying to do is just kind of balance out the room rental rates so they match across facilities and the size of the rooms. We want to add a yearly pass to our community recreation centers. That's something that has not existed before. We are looking at adjusting the rental rates for our enclosed shelter houses to, this starts on
On 19.
page 19, and it goes all the way to basically the end of the ordinance. There's a lot of different things in there. The best place to actually see the summary of them is in the blue letter itself, where the last 3 pages are the proposed areas that change, just the areas that change. But shelter house rental rates, what we're trying to do is match the market and when those are used. Without a doubt, the newest shelter houses that we have constructed, the enclosed ones, the J. Spence in Greenwood Park, the Walker Shelter House in McCrae Park, the new shelter that'll open up this summer in Columbus Park, the Ding Darling Shelter. Any shelter house that we renovate is pretty much booked nonstop Friday, Saturday, and Sunday from March all the way through October without a doubt. Monday through Thursday, they're not rented nearly as much. So one of the things you'll see here is we actually raised the rates at Ding Darling just a little bit and lowered them Monday through Thursday to try to attract more people to potentially use that Monday through Thursday. That's what you'll see in most of the changes in rental rates here, is trying to match or keep up with the market, reflect the way people use our facilities, and really kind of just take them to a spot where we feel comfortable that they're priced appropriately, that people can use the facilities, but not too high. Berlin Marina, upping the prices a little bit there, and then field rental rates, just taking those a little bit up over the next 2 or 3 years.
I'd say 2 things happening in fees. You've done such a great job of doing incremental small adjustments in the last 10 years, so these aren't progressive. And then we have newer facilities coming online that we just need to have a fee for the first time. So that's kind of what we're trying to accomplish here. I'd pause you because there's a lot here and we do not want to rush you, but there was not an easy way for us to break this down into a PowerPoint without making every single thing a slide. So I'll pause there and ask you if you have any question on any of our fees.
I do want to offer one clarification. Under the Riverview Prairie Meadows stage, under 74-187, in the blue letter, we have it correct, saying that it's just one fee to rent the stage, whether you're a free event or you're a paid event. But in the language, we have it as you would rent the stage and you could rent the road. We really felt like that probably didn't make the most sense, so we'll have to change that to just one rental fee. That was an error on my part to not match those up, get those matched up. But we are recommending the one that's in the blue letter of one fee, depending on the type of event you want to do at Riverview.
I would just say, we know how hard your department studies these things, and there's so much research that you do that goes into everything that you recommend to us, that I would say I trust in you to have done the research to make these changes appropriate.
Thank you.
I want to also just highlight, earlier in this presentation, Richard talked about the city's equity coordinator. It's a newer position, about a little over a year that we've had that person on staff in the city's human rights department, and civil and human rights, I guess is the official name. They also looked at all this with us and sat down because we really do have passion to make sure we're not going to either create a rule or create a fee that's going to not allow all of Des Moines to participate. It's important for us that we have such a diverse community, and there's also, as we had talked about a lot of times in this board, there's a lot of income disparity in our community, and so we want to make sure these parks are truly for the people and all the people. So I like the fees where they're at. I like the creativity of our team looking at making sure, even for example, they can close shelters. We look at the use, the demands of use. Monday through Thursday was low, so let's lower that down because we're seeing a lot of corporate use Monday through Thursday, and then we're seeing the families on the weekend, but also a high demand too. So I think our fees are all within reason, but again, we're open to any questions, debate, concerns, whatever you'd like to talk about.
When were some of these changed last? You know, I know we visit golf fees pretty often and
Yes.
aquatics, but can you talk a little bit about when some of these shelter fees that are being increased, when we changed them last?
So the shelter fees have been several years since we've done that. We'd have to go back and get the language out to figure out exactly what that was, but we can put that in the next blue letter to let you know. But I think it's probably been 3 or 4 years since we've
That's
touched
right
in
on some of the shelter
closed
fees.
shelter
We
rates.
keep track of that usually, so
Yep.
we want to make sure that we're not always coming back. Most of these here, if they don't have a fee and a year lesson to it, you'd see, but most of them are no more than 3 years at the most since we touched the fee.
And what we've done, if you look not in the blue letter, but in the enclosed shelter rates, based on the quality and the size of the facility is kind of how we tiered that. So the smallest size and the oldest shelters have the cheapest prices, working our way up to the largest, which is Ding Darling, and the new shelters that we are renovating each year.
We're also trying to drive, just like we do in golf, you try to drive demand to other low-performing facilities. So the new ones are getting a lot of requests. I'll just use the example of the new McRae enclosed shelter. You can't touch it this coming year now because it's so popular for a Saturday, Sunday, probably a lot of Fridays as well. Maybe the Bob Mahaffey shelter, which is one of the oldest enclosed shelters in Grandview Park, that doesn't have the brick veneer on the outside, it's just got the wood framing, but still has heating and cooling. That one has less demand, but we've opened up some new features. So that one we've dialed back, the other ones we've dialed up a little bit, trying to make sure that everybody goes to different parts of the city, but also balancing the demand and use of all those facilities. And guess what? It's in our own interest as staff to make sure that if that doesn't work, we come back to you the next year and say, hey, let's change this. We thought this would work, but it didn't work. So.
Now, does the director have authority to waive any fees?
I have the ability to waive fees. It's in here. I can't remember what section it's in, but Ann's going to tell me in a second here as I'm telling you about it. I have the authority as long as I give you and the city council and the city manager a report annually. It talks about where I waived the fees. You might remember last year we had a discussion about the orchestra band that was down at Western Gateway Park. And so we waive fees for folks that are, you have page 31 there?
Yeah.
Bottom of page 31.
It's actually the same as before, it just looks new because of the numbering changed.
Yeah, every year in January, we bring a report of all the things for the calendar year before that we've waived fees for.
Sorry.
If I go off memory, it's around $5,000 worth of fees per year that we waived, all for great causes in Des Moines.
Now, neighborhood associations would be another one that I have a question about. Our neighborhood associations, and I know you probably don't want to override a paying customer, but what about neighborhood associations?
You know, we typically try to make all neighborhood associations, if they need a facility, allow them to have a facility for free. That's always been if it's an official neighborhood meeting or neighborhood associations meeting, I try to make sure they always have a free space to go.
And what we find a lot is the neighborhood associations are meeting Monday through Thursday in probably 95% of cases. So because those are the least used days of the week for the shelters, that we usually don't have a problem plugging them in there.
Okay.
Another thing we do too is we're not trying to publicize it, but we also don't make it a secret. So as you know, we all have an assignment of about 3 neighborhood associations per management level employee of the Park and Recreation Department.
Right.
So they make sure to tell them, hey, for example, recently we found the one had a trouble, so we got them into Pioneer Columbus Community Recreation Center, and so they have a new home now for them. But most people actually meet in some of our park facilities. So it's kind of, it's to us, it's rewarding to have them meet in these parks. Because it always leads to something as far as a volunteer project. I can't tell you, I can't think of one who doesn't give back to us because we give them a free shelter rental. Next thing they're out there cleaning the fence line or painting the picnic tables or doing something for us. It's a good exchange.
Richard?
Okay. Next. No more questions on any of the fees?
Look good.
All right, just a couple things as we kind of round towards the end here. We want a clarification of intent on 2 things. Currently, the way the ordinance is written, it's the Park and Recreation Board and the Park and Recreation Department or Director. So what we're proposing it to change to Parks and Recreation Board and Parks and Recreation Director or Department. So just a clarification on how we've been using it for a number of years. And so we just want to have some consistency and felt like this was the way that most people referred to Parks and Recreation Department or the Parks and Recreation Boards.
If we had more than one park, we felt we should just make that clarification.
The next section is just removing some unnecessary items. You'll see a section about Principal Park is completely deleted because we didn't need those elements and they're covered by an operating agreement with the Iowa Cubs to manage Principal Park. Description of the department divisions, we really felt like that wasn't needed and took away the ability for Ben as the Parks and Recreation Director to reorganize and kind of shift things as Parks and Recreation changes over the years. So it wasn't really needed because it didn't reflect how we've been organized for probably the last 15 plus years. And then we just went through and found a lot of terms that were outdated and no longer used. One is a bathhouse. So we have not used the term bathhouse for quite a while in the Parks and Recreation Department and any of the facilities we have. So just try to scour through there to find terms that maybe weren't used or common anymore through the process of cleaning up the ordinance, which you'll see throughout a lot of this. The next one is talking about alcohol use. Probably the biggest change is we are proposing to allow alcohol at all enclosed shelter houses. Currently, only 2 or 3 of them allowed alcohol there. So we just wanted to kind of spread that out throughout the system because that is a request we often get. And we need to clarify alcohol use at Grays Lake Park as part of the proposed concession agreement that's coming up here. It was allowed as part of events there, but didn't really encompass what we envisioned will be the space that will be part of the concessionaire agreement if it gets to City Council for approval. So some clarification there, as well as you'll see just some other text updates through the alcohol section to try to clarify. I know Bill had a few questions on that, so hopefully the handout that we gave tonight clarifies and simplifies the way it reads and sounds, but we're happy to answer any questions on that right now.
So does that still require some type of permit, or can anyone just walk up to a shelter and crack a beer?
So because
As long as you're not selling, if you're just providing for your family gathering or event and they're consuming it and not being sold it, these facilities listed in that section are now approved. They do not need to come to this board. And we've allowed a certain amount, Anne's going to clarify something in a second, but we've allowed a certain amount in the past of enclosed shelters. We know it's already happening at the ones that we're not allowing, so we want to clear that up to make it simplified. Anne, did you want to add to that?
You know what, the way it's written now, you still have to get a permit in an enclosed shelter if it's you having a picnic and breaking out your own beer.
Oh, the permit is also part of our permit to rent the shelter, though.
Yes,
Yes.
but if Lloyd's question was, you don't have a permit to use that shelter, you're just there for the day. And
You
go-
can't access the shelter.
You couldn't
No.
access anyways.
It's locked anyway.
Yeah, they're enclosed, so you wouldn't get in there
yeah,
anyways.
it's only for the enclosed shelter houses. So there's, I believe, 10 of them starting once Columbus opens up later here. Those are the only 10 that we're talking about that you could have alcohol. Like Ben said, it can only be canned beer, no glass bottles, no keg beer. You theoretically could bring wine in a box, basically no glass, and nothing in a keg size.
Unless, for example, unless it is governed by that Grays Lake with a potential concessionaire, then
Yes.
that is.
Any concessionaire.
They have to
Yeah,
have-
specific that they cannot bring any beer in. And then I did want to say that on numbers, on page, I think page 1 on number 6, Savage sports complex is omitted there, and that should be added.
Okay, good catch. That's one of the sports complexes. Yep.
One thing I do want to note on those, where those concession agreements, they have to have a state alcohol license to be able to do that. So that was one thing that we noted in there as well.
Back to Gray's Lake, but that's, the consumption is limited to that area by the concession where they anticipate maybe doing some live music, not like down on the beach.
So what we'll do as part of the concessionaires agreement is we'll define the areas that we all agree upon. So it could be bigger than just that, but it has to be an area that can be controlled and approved by a liquor license. So it could be not just only the top cement part of that overlook. There's a grassy area behind it that's flat where a band might set up and play. It could be into that area too. Those details are still being ironed out, but yes, we'll get that point where we have a clear definition and boundaries of where alcohol can be consumed. We won't allow alcohol to be consumed outside of the vicinity of the overlook. It won't be at the beach, it won't be at the yoga area. It'll be somehow smallly converted into one little area.
State licensing also has, you must have containment areas on that too, so that kind of takes care of itself.
So just one other thing I'd like to note under 74-103, this is part of the neighborhood sign program. We just received the latest update, which was published of the draft zoning ordinance for the community, which talks about signage throughout the city. So there will need to be some changes to section 74-103. Anne has just received that in the last couple days. So what we'll ask her to do is make proposed changes to that, and then we'll have Rebecca send that out in the next couple days. Just wanted you to be aware of that. We thought, since the timing makes sense being so close to this, we didn't want to wait for that section to come a few months after this is all done. So you will get that in the next couple days. Please email us if you see any issues or concerns with that ahead of the meeting next month. But we just want to get that out probably in the next couple days.
So I had a question in that space. Item 4, I think, talks about the size of the city logo. And it seems like it needs to be more proportionate to what the size of the sign actually is. And I don't know.
Page 11?
Yeah, I'm sorry, page 11, item 4, where it says the requirement of the city logo is 6 inches by 7 inches. And depending how big the sign is, that may be a large piece of the signage.
Actually, in the revised section, 1 through 7, I think, is all taken out.
Okay.
And it can become, but would still be within the policy of the director. So it's kind of giving the director a little more discretion, and references are specifically just to the zoning chapter.
Okay.
So it's not going to change this drastically.
The anticipated change, will it do anything with, and I know there's been some tension sometime between fundraising and sponsors and logos of companies and stuff. Is any of the anticipated changes going to change that dynamic and how that's handled?
Well, because of the Gilbert case, the Arizona Gilbert case from a couple years ago, we need to make the signs, make it clear that the signs that are for neighborhood associations are actually city signs. We can still require payment by, the funds for the sign and the maintenance has to be by the neighborhood association. But because of that, words like sponsorship, that kind of thing won't be used. And it'll be more a matter of the director's policy as far as the advertising and sponsorship and logo use. Instead of putting black and white in the ordinance, it'd be something that he would have more flexibility on. So that would cover the size of the city's logo, and that would cover things like sponsorship or advertising on the signs.
We've really tried to keep signage to a minimum, and including neighborhood association signs in parks. We had a long discussion, probably about 7-8 years ago with this board, because we had a neighborhood that wanted to put a nice, big, large signage to recognize their neighborhood in a park. And we felt as a board, as a good policy was that it made the park almost feel like it wasn't for everybody by having their name. And we already had our sign there for the name of the park. It started to have sign overlaps, and it became cluttery. So we decided that we tried to write that ordinance. They would want to go other right-of-way places around the city and not take ownership, even in the wrong view, of a park away from the Parks Department, away from the city.
One of the other problems of that discussion was there were also 2 or 3 neighborhoods that bordered that park.
That's true.
And so now,
Allow
what do you
one,
do?
you have to allow
I-
three.
I think maybe we need to address this a little more on the neighborhood's involvement in the parks as far as their signage and stuff. I can see this becoming, I guess I don't realize, when did we start allowing neighborhood associations to put signs in a park? And, you know, for example, Grandview Park or McRae Park or any of the bigger parks, you're saying right now the neighborhood associations can put their...
That's a lot of criteria to meet, so if they can meet that criteria, it's potential. But that was a way of allowing everybody to have a process that would allow a true independent analysis to be completed if that sign should be put there. It makes it very difficult, though. I'll be the first to tell you that. And that's the way it was designed to be. And I was one that had to write this ordinance. I remember this. Because we really don't want to be in the game of posting people's signs at our parks. That's just the way I still feel that way today. Because again, I talk about consistency. When we look at this, we look at consistency and transparency through managing this. Is when you tell one group yes, we're the city. That means we can't tell the next group that's similar no. And what type of association next wants to come to you and put their sign in the park? And then next thing you know, you have 7 signs in this park. It doesn't feel like a city park anymore.
Comments on this?
I agree with that.
Well, maybe let's see what Ann comes up with here when she sends that back out. We'll have,
Send it.
again, time next month to, you'll see it, you can comment as soon as you get her proposed revisions to it and staff's revisions to it, and then we'll go from there. Again, good timing, because if you haven't watched, you haven't seen the news, the city's looking at rewriting a lot of its zoning ordinances that cover not just the Parks Department, but the whole entire city. So those are right on the heels of this.
Is there anyone that is opposed to any neighborhood signs in the park?
I'm glad you have the criteria set up in a way that it's not so easy for an association or organization to slap a sign up.
So far, it's worked. We had one request that required this to be developed, and today we haven't had a single request since that one came through. That's all I can tell you. I mean, that's just experience only so far.
Do the neighborhoods have to actually border that park, or can they just randomly pick out a park and say, this is us?
That they have to, yes.
Okay.
All right, with that, just kind of want to explain to what the process might be moving forward. We will take all the comments that we received tonight from the board. We'll make revisions to the draft ordinance at that point. So Ann will send out through Rebecca the sign language here in the next few days. We'll revise based on all the discussion we have today. We'll bring it back for the board's recommendation for approval at your June meeting. Should that receive a favorable recommendation from the Parks and Recreation Board, it'll be taken forward to the City Council. Typical process for that is, because it's an ordinance, it needs to be read and considered by the council 3 times, so that could be a maximum of 3 meetings, so probably into mid-August, but the council's authority or request, they can waive 2 of those ratings, so it theoretically could be done 1, but we expect that it'll probably go for all 3 readings. After that, approximately 30 days or less, then those ordinances can go into effect. So we're looking at the very earliest, probably mid-August, but likely into September before any changes would fully take effect.
I'd also ask that once we get to a point where we feel we have something that you want to recommend onto the city council, that each and every one of you come to the first council meeting, because this is a big project, and I want them to see that you as a board worked hard on this as well as staff, and it will take as many as we can get for you in the first meeting, because that way the council understands how much effort and how much thought went into this and how much you support it. Or if you don't support it, you can come speak against it as well.
I would like to have everyone review this again next month, or before next month, and because this I think this is an important document moving forward, and this kind of is going to set the trend for the next several years. So I think it's very important.
Yeah, and this is what you as the Parks and Recreation Board are set up to do. This helps you to provide the guidance to the City Council as well as the Park and Recreation staff through Ben as your director on how we operate, manage, and maintain the Parks and Recreation system. So George is 100% right on this. You know, take the time, make sure we've got it right, make sure it matches how we want to be as a Parks and Recreation organization and a Parks and Recreation system for the city, because this really reflects what we do on a daily basis, and the guidance that we bring forward to you is based on a lot of the language that's in this ordinance. And we appreciate all the time that you put into it and the questions that have been asked so far. And if you see questions between now and June, feel free to email us, email Rebecca, myself, Ben, anyone you want, and we can get you answers.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions?
Just one comment on the vendors in the park, and I had a discussion with Ben once before, that they need to be in the area that's designated by the sign. And I don't know what the appeal process is, but in Ewing, that sign was right next to the trash, which is really not an appealing place for the vendor to set up. And so
We can do that.
When we're identifying those places, we need to be more mindful of that. The vendor didn't really want to set up right next to the
We tried to
trash.
give, when we did this is the food trucks. When we first went to the new food trucks, when they became popular 4 or 5 years ago, we tried to pick parking spaces that were the furthest away from the amenities because we wanted to save those for our patrons, as well as closer to trash because they're going to create trash. That's why we did that.
Yeah.
But we can, that's that's a policy level decision I can make and move. So just let me know if you see something like that, we'll make those changes.
Other comments, anyone? Well, Richard, I thought it was a very good presentation and very thorough. Thank you. We need a motion to.
A lot of thanks to Ann too. She put a
I'm
lot of-
sorry, yes, Ann, I wasn't omitting you.
No, you did a great job with your communication and the presentation.
One of the great things, Gene, we did is prior to we even sat down with Ann, is we had all the division managers sit down with their staff and say, hey, what is it you deal with on a daily basis? What makes sense? What doesn't make sense? We talked to our call center staff and what issues do you have? What fees do you think are wrong or could be increased or decreased? And we went to Ann with a spreadsheet. I think it had well over our 150, 200 items on there. And we've just spent time walking through each one of those to see what makes sense and doesn't make sense. And the result is what you see in the communication and the ordinance recommended changes. So it's a lot of work by our entire team that it's exciting to see.
Well, thank you, and thank you very much.
Yep.
With that, do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we are receiving and filing. Let's go to Part D, and Vicki is not here, so Cindy or Sam, would you like to present the slate of officers?
Sure. When we talked to Cindy and Vicki and I talked, and we thought that the people that were like you, Cindy, Bill, and Andrea, as long as y'all wanted to serve another term, who's to say no? And the only new member, Sarah, we kind of focused in on you, and one of the things that we thought about when you would make such a good member was that you're an environmentalist. And I always felt, we all felt, that environmentalists need to be on more committees. And so we feel that you would represent very well.
Cindy, any comments?
No?
Okay, any discussion on the slate of officers? Motion?
Move.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that is a receive and file. Let's go to the report of the Park and Recreation Director. Am I forgetting something? I don't think I am.
You're doing great. We purposely didn't have a report at the top of the agenda because we didn't know how long Chapter 74 might take, but because of some timely weather issues, we want to give you a few updates on some things that we've talked about. So Richard's going to give you a quick flood update, how that affects two things, just our trails, but plus what we originally told the community about Grays Lake being closed because the trail being reworked and resurfaced.
Chair Davis, members of the Parks and Recreation Board, Richard Brown, Assistant Director. Like Ben said, and you can all see, we've had a lot of rain over the last 1 to 2 weeks that's really saturated the ground across the community as well as pretty much most of Iowa. As a result of that, most of the creeks and rivers are very high, which really is impacting most of our trails. So without putting a list up here, you can just assume if it's close to a river or a creek that it's closed. The hope is that with the rain today that we're maybe getting past the worst of this so that the rivers and creeks will start to recede in the next week to 2 weeks so we can start to open those up one by one. But I just tell people if you see a trail closed gate or some sort of signage along our trails, just turn around and don't jeopardize yourself. There's a reason those are closed, either flooding or some sort of damage. Also, like Ben said, Grays Lake has been closed for the last 2+ weeks to resurface the trail. But as a result of the rivers as well, it was flooded partially over the weekend, and we expect that Fleur Drive will be closed at 7 p.m. tonight because of the Raccoon River rising again. So that will flood the entire park, which will probably stay that way for a neighborhood of another 2 to 3 weeks, plus then time to dry out, and then time for the contractor to finish the work. So we expect that Grays Lake will likely be closed at least another month, unforeseen because of all the water that we've had. But so we just ask you to pass that around and encourage people to check out other opportunities while they wait for Grays Lake to be open. And just not a situation we want to be in, but can't predict the weather. So appreciate everyone's effort to get that out. And as soon as we know more, we'll publish that out through Ben and our social media and all the TV and newspapers. Any questions on that?
Questions?
They were rolling right along, too.
Gosh, we actually got a good section already rebuilt. The east section that was washed away at the last ice event. And this came through. So like Richard said, Fleur Drive is closing tonight. So if you have to go home that way, we'll have to get you out of here soon. And then we'll see what happens. It's all about how quickly it can go down, and it's not a fast function. It takes a while for the river to come back down.
Based on how it happened this spring, it was 3 weeks from when it flooded to when we reopened, and that's not having to finish up the construction project that the contractor's out there to do. So as soon as we know more, we'll pass it along, but expect probably another month.
How will this impact the tunnel going under Fleur?
Everything is really construction-wise is just taking a long time. Not just that passageway, the bridge over the river, the shoreline project in Grays Lake, the projects we have pretty much everywhere in the park system, not just parks, but also engineering, streets, sewers. They're all way behind due to just the amount of rain. So I think the public can expect a lot of closures to continue a lot longer than we thought they would this year just because of the sheer volume of rain we've had. So it'll just probably push everything back a little bit farther.
Remember, when we were planning to open Grays Lake on June 1st, because the work was estimated to be done with perfect weather scenarios, the Raccoon River Trail section was still going to be closed because that was being redone as part of the bridge project. So we were still going to plan on having people walk the road back. So if you try to find a silver lining, if there's anything, the park wasn't going to be fully functional anyways for a while until that bridge was built. So this will give them time and us time to re-clean up and maybe open up when everything's opened again. So. All right, any questions on that? The other ones are quick too here. We developed and circulated a memo today about wading pools. We just used the same science we've used in the last 2 years. For some reason, that wading pool job, and it's just not very attractive to people. It pays a little over $9.50 an hour, but we're still struggling. That's with a $1 an hour increase, finding people. So if it's anything like the last 2 years, there are some people that just wait till school's out before they want to apply for a job for some reason, and that's what happened in the last 2 years. We were able to fill it quickly soon after school got out, which in Des Moines is this Friday for a lot of the kids. So maybe by next week, we'll be able to send out some good news and start opening some of these wading pools. But to be transparent and consistent, we're going to close all the 8 pools just on a rotation basis. So 4 get closed this time, and then if it go into the next week, another 4. We'll just keep rotating the same way to be fair to everybody.
Ben, I just made a comment. Again, part of this hits close to home because it's something I really enjoy to do with my kids, with Ella and Max, is to go to wading pools, and we kind of fought to get that money back in there. Do you have any flexibility on that $9 an hour versus a few more bucks an hour? Because the number of people that go to those wading pools is, I mean, I don't know what your numbers report, but when we're there, they're just always a ton of kids there, and it's something I think it's real we should continue to be supportive of.
I
if we
think
can.
your question's a valid question. I think right now, the short answer is not this season the way the city budgeting system works, but we're gonna be in the budgeting program here in about a week, starting to work on the following two-year solution this time around. The city wants to do a two-year solution, which I appreciate. It's a lot of staff resource to develop the budget. We could look at that one again.
Not just for the wading pools, but
No.
too, I think the
it will-
aquatic
I
staffing
think it
in
has to be
general.
all of them, because we don't want to, solve this issue despite ourselves over at the lifeguard side, because they'll be catching up with lifeguards sooner than later, and those jobs have certifications to them. So last time we did this, it was about $100,000 impact to the budget when we gave everybody some type of a raise. We looked at all of these and tried to do some analysis, comparables, what the metro area was paying for this type of labor, plus what fast food and retail was paying. And we came back with about overall $100,000 worth of adjustments. And that seemed to help on some jobs, but it hasn't helped here. I'll remind you that eventually, hopefully during my time, if I get to stay as long as I hope to be here, these 8 pools will be gone and replaced with spray grounds to take no staff. So that's the long vision. But the short vision is something we have to resolve, like you've said, Wade, or Lloyd, and we'll be able to knock that out, hopefully in the next budget process with support from this board.
The spray grounds, now this would be a good time for us to beat the band on the spray grounds, because they are convenient. And I know, Lloyd, you've always been an advocate of these wading pools and the areas and stuff, and we certainly appreciate that. But I will tell you, the spray grounds will take away a lot of this problem,
Well, those of you going on the tour, you'll have your opportunity to make your comments to the elected leaders about how you feel about those type of things. That's this Thursday, don't forget, noon.
By the way, that
let's hope for
tour is
nice weather
Thursday,
this year.
12 o'clock at the Iowa Cubs, or Principal Park, if it isn't flooded.
Meet me in the restaurant.
Okay, 12 o'clock Thursday, 12 o'clock Thursday.
Okay, do you want to make a comment on Memorial Day?
I know Ben has some other things to discuss, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the cemeteries. As you Facebook advocates probably saw we got blasted a little bit on, regarding cemeteries. And I would tell you that Memorial Day seems to bring out all the comments, because that's when everyone visits, and it's, usually a lot of the families at cemeteries and stuff. And it seems like we have negative comments and we have positive comments, but most of the negative comments was regarding the Masonic section of the cemetery, and that's something that they want to do themselves and not have the city involved with their maintenance issues. And sometimes if they're a group that depends on volunteers or whatever, those aren't kept up to snuff all the times.
Yeah, I wasn't clear. Was that didn't sound, the more I listened to it and thought about it, I'm wondering if that was a cemetery, at least specifically, that's not under Park and Rec?
It's not. So the Masonic section, and this is not uncommon, there are sections within our cemeteries that have operating agreements that allow different groups to maintain and operate. We have not, I shouldn't say ever, but a very, very long time, decades and decades, operated the Masonic section, probably ever. And so that means that they have the rights to that land and sell their own spaces, but also maintain, they keep the revenue, but maintain their own roads, their own water lines, mow their own grass. So the only comments that I saw, and by the way, Ganesh deserves great credit, the cemeteries during my tenure have never looked as good as they look this weekend. I went out weekends before, and they had a great list. The things that we can control, there's some things we can't control, like the roads at Woodland are old and need to be replaced. We'll get to those eventually, but the grounds, the conditions of the mowing, with all the rain, we still got everything mowed, which is to say a lot. They did a lot of mowing and pushing that around, getting that completed. The flowers were all in. So I didn't see any negative comments that were truly ours, unfortunately. And I understand why somebody would say that they thought that was Glendale Cemetery, because as a layman, you walk
calls
in,
after that.
it's all one piece of property. Yeah. And so it is, I just want to clarify, all of our grounds were looking great, in my opinion. And again, hats off to Ganesh and his team. They do wonderful work. They're all passionate. And I know they worked their tails off all weekend long, making sure that they went the extra mile for everybody that couldn't find their loved one's spot. They showed them around personally, made sure everybody found what they needed to find, and took in even work orders. We take, while Memorial Day comes, we take work orders in too. So if you show us that there's something you want done in the cemetery, we'll put it on the list for the year. We'll try to get everything out that year. So again, everything looked good to us, and I received no comments that were truly ours.
And I'll echo Ganesh. I've made it to 2 cemeteries, seen family members, and I will tell you, fantastic. I cannot believe as much weather problems as we've had this spring, how great those cemeteries looked. And hats off to you. You did a great job.
So in that same vein, the parks look just as good and got no complaints this Memorial Day weekend. I think about 75 parks, and Matt's team opened up one pool off of a very hard, difficult scenario when we had a hailstorm go through. You saw the pictures of what Northwest Pool looked like, and they were able to hurry up and switch with Ron and Matt working together on that one. So everything open for our Super Bowl weekend here, and it's off to a great start for us, I'd say. Outside of this, and maybe in Chapter 74 we'll outlaw flooding from now on too, and it'll be fine. So.
Well, we've complimented everyone here. What are we going to say about Rebecca?
She's always the best. There's nothing to say about that. She's always the best.
We should acknowledge Des Moines Park and Rec receiving top honors.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, so congratulations.
It's a pretty big win for us, I'd say.
Yes, it was.
That's all of us, you included.
And I'll tell you, was it a week ago or 2 weeks ago, you went to the Lilac meeting, and I thought that was great, too. You want to...
Yeah, the International Lilac Society came to Des Moines and toured our lilac arboretum, so it was quite an honor. We did a little keynote speech for them, and they toured around the city, and they had a great time, and literally from all over the world, France, Quebec, you name it. They were from all over. It was pretty interesting, so...
Well, thank you, sir. Let's go to committee reports. Andrea, anything about urban conservation?
Nothing new since we last met, so I'll report back in June.
Bill, Steve, golf?
Golf courses are mushy.
Joel?
In your packet, you have the Wreaths Across America. So take a look at this. It's a really cool thing that the cemetery and they're teaming up with to provide wreaths for our veterans. And our next meeting will be June 5th at 4 o'clock.
Trails? Greenway?
Nothing since the last meeting.
We have a meeting coming up, so we'll
Okay.
report back next month.
Just your bylaws.
Thank you.
Yes.
Any comments, anyone? Any closing questions?
Oh, I did forget that we are still actively, oh no, we did the Chapter 34 stuff. Never mind.
The big Chapter 34 is coming up soon. It's
We're still
scheduled for next
reviewing.
meeting.
Heather?
I do have one comment. This past week, it's all kind of a blur because it was super busy for me, but my youngest daughter graduated and we rented the Greenwood Park, I think the J. Spence shelter, and it was just it's just a great space. And I mean, it was unlocked. They came and locked it when I called. Everything. I mean, I think when everyone comes to the party too, because I've had 4 out of 5 there, I don't hear anything but compliments, and I think hopefully they think about renting it too. And I went to the one over at McRae because I hadn't seen that indoor space, and I like that one even more because of the green space and not the spray grounds. Not that that's bad, but anyway,
Yeah.
both great.
Wait till you see Columbus if you're going on the tour. You'll see we're going to give you the sneak peek at the Columbus Park enclosed shelter.
I will
So
not be
you guys
able
will
to
get the
do
first to
that.
see it.
Who's
But
making
anyway,
it?
it was great. They were
Thursday.
great.
Who's going to be there Thursday?
I try my best.
Okay. All right. Anything else that I'm forgetting?
Just last but not least, a pitch for the Friends of Des Moines Parks. Their event's June 14th, so it'll be between now and your next board meeting.
that's right.
So the bike riding golf event, if you haven't signed up, do so. It's a good opportunity to help support us.
I've already reserved the cart to drive around. So. Well, we had a good meeting, and you know what? We're in a great spot in Des Moines Parks and Recreation. Things are going very well for us, and even in the weather, if the weather's bad, we still have a lot of great things happening. So with that, we will close the meeting. And Joel, I thought you had to get to see
7
number.
o'clock is graduation.
Okay. All right. Meeting adjourned.